Chapter 11, Part 2 of the Albert Gate Mystery by Louis Tracy. This Librivox Recording is in the public domain. Recording by Carolin. Chapter 11, Part 2. After Lord Fairholme's departure, Brett took matters easily. He did not put in an appearance at the prefecture until late in the afternoon, and, as he surmised, the commissary whom he encountered the previous night had even then only just arrived in his office. Without any difficulty, the barrister was introduced to the official, who evidently awaited an explanation of the visit with great curiosity. Brett's ill-humour at the uncalled-for interference of the police was now quite dispelled, and he greeted the commissary with the genial affability which so quickly won him the friendship of casual acquaintances. "I think," he began, "that your agents, monsieur, were watching me throughout the whole of yesterday." "That is so," nodded the other, wondering what pitfall lay behind this leading question. "Do I take it that after my departure from number 11 Rue Barbette about midday, they maintain no further guard over that house?" "Assuredly. It was monsieur's personal movements which called for observation." "Then you do not know that an individual whose identity may be much more important than mine is an inmate of the apartment at this moment, probably a captive against his will, possibly a corpse?" The Frenchman's huge moustache bristled with alarm and annoyance. "It is a strange thing, monsieur," he cried, "that an English gentleman should come to Paris and know more about the movements and haunts of criminals than the French police." It was no part of Brett's design to rub the official the wrong way, so he said gently, "Your remark is quite justifiable, and under ordinary circumstances any such pretence on my part would be ridiculous. But you must remember, monsieur, that I came here from London possessed of special information, which was not known even to the police authorities in that city. I am working solely on the private interests of persons high in English society, and it would not serve the purpose of any of the governments concerned were too much stress publicly laid on their connection with this mystery. If I can succeed in elucidating the problem, it will be a comparatively easy matter for the police to bring the real criminals to justice. As a step towards that end, I have come to you now to place you in possession of a clue which may reveal itself in the Rue Barbette. All I ask is, in the first instance, that the affair may be conducted with the utmost secrecy, and secondly, that you will permit me to be present when you examine the person whom I expect to find there. I may be able to help you very materially in your questions, provided the man is alive and well." The commissary was soothed. The barrister's judicial reference to the importance and confidential nature of the inquiry raised in his mind a dazzling vision of personal distinction and preferment. "The matter shall be conducted with the utmost discretion," he cried. "What force does monsieur consider to be requisite in order to examine this house thoroughly, and prevent the attempted escape of others whom we may find there in addition to the man described?" Brett with difficulty repressed a smile. "I do not think a large force of police will be necessary. If you yourself, monsieur, and another officer will accompany me in a cab, I am sure we will be able to deal with all possible opposition. There is no exit from the flat save through the main door, and the apartment is situated on the second story. Escape by way of the windows is practically impossible if we act with promptitude." The commissary could not reach the Rue Barbette too rapidly. He bundled a subordinate into a fiacre, and the three were driven off at breakneck speed. They stopped the vehicle at the corner of the street and walked quietly to the house, attracting no attention, as neither of the Frenchmen were in uniform. Inquiry from the concierge elicited the information that none of the occupants of the flat tenanted by the Turkish gentleman had put in an appearance since the previous afternoon. So the trio mounted the staircase, and without any preliminary summons the junior official applied his shoulder to the door. The lock yielded quite readily. Indeed, the damage done by Lord Fairholme was but temporarily repaired, and no special precaution had been taken to fasten the place. All was quiet within. The first room they searched was empty. So was the second, but in a bedroom, the door of which was locked and required forcible treatment, an extraordinary sight met their eyes. Stretched on the bed, gagged and securely tied, was the figure of the diminutive Frenchman who, little more than 24 hours earlier, had so coolly suggested that Brett should be murdered. Stout leather thongs were fastened to his wrists and ankles, and then tied to the four uprights of the bed. His arms and legs were consequently stretched widely apart, and the only sign of vitality about the man was the terrible expression of fear and hate in his eyes as he looked at them. The gag stuffed in his mouth prevented him from uttering the slightest coherent sound, whilst the agony of his frame, owing to the position in which he lay, joined to the exhaustion induced by terror and want of food, rendered him a pitiable object. They removed the gag and cut the bonds. The poor wretch remained on his back unable to move, though he flinched somewhat when the police, as gently as possible, loosened the leather straps from his wrists and ankles, for his useless struggles had caused the thongs to cut deeply into his skin. Brett was the first to realize the unfortunate wretch's chief requirement. He procured some water, raised the man's head, and allowed him to take a deep and invigorating draught. "Why, it is the Worm," said the junior policeman. "I know him well. He is a pickpocket, an expert rascal in his line, but hardly up to the standard of great events." At the sound of his nickname a flicker of intelligence came into the little thief's eyes, but he was still dazed and did not recognize his rescuers. "I don't care what you do with me," he murmured at last, in a weak and cracked voice. "Kill me quietly if you want to, but don't tie me up again. I have done nothing to deserve it. I really haven't. I have been acting quite square in this business." And then he broke down and whimpered further protestations of innocence. "He is weak from want of food and dazed with terror," said Brett quietly. "I suggest that one of you should get him some meat and wine, whilst the others remain here and endeavour to reassure him. In half an hour he will be greatly recovered. Meanwhile we might examine the place." The commissary thought Brett's suggestion a good one. His assistant summoned the concierge and attended to the wants of the Worm, whilst Brett and the commissary conducted a careful scrutiny of the premises. They found little, however, beyond a considerable accumulation of dirt, for the ways of Turks are primitive and their habits unpleasant in European households. It was evident that before taking their departure the occupants of the flat had carefully removed or destroyed all documents or other articles which might throw light on their proceedings. The leather thongs which bound the prisoner evoked some comment from the barrister. "These are somewhat unusual articles," he said to the commissary. "You will notice that they are cut from raw cowhide and well stretched. In other words, they are the familiar bowstrings of Constantinople, and warranted not to yield if twisted around the neck. I think they will answer for other purposes than tying people to beds." "We must find these Turks," said the commissary. "They are desperate characters." "Find them by all means," said Brett earnestly, "but on no account arrest them." "And why, monsieur?" cried the other, with elevated eyebrows. "Because if you do you will paralyse our future actions. When all is said and done, the only charge you can bring against them is a trivial one. It is evident they merely tied up this man, either with the object of frightening him into a confession or to leave their hands free whilst they deal with his employers. Perhaps they had both objects in view. In either event, the appearance of the police on the scene would close their mouths more tightly than an oyster. As it is, I expect they will return, and if possible, you must compel the concierge to conceal the fact that you have visited the house. Let him put all the blame on me. They know that I am mixed up in the inquiry and fear me far less than the recognized authorities. Oblige me in this respect, and you will not regret it." The policeman was wise enough to fall in with the suggestion. An hour later, the Worm was taken in a cab to the prefecture, as his condition was yet so hopeless that little real benefit could ensue from a searching cross-examination. So Brett parted company with the officials, having made an appointment with the commissary for the next day at noon, when they assumed that the prisoner would be considerably recovered from his weakness and fright. The barrister subsequently made a round of the minor cafés in the neighbourhood of the Cirque d'Hiver. After much casual questioning, he elicited the information that a well-known circus, of which Mademoiselle Beaucaire was at one time a shining light, was performing at that moment at Marseille. He ascertained that during the winter season this class of entertainment perambulated the south of France and northern Italy. The actor from whom he gleaned these important facts said that he had a trustworthy friend in Marseille who would easily be able to ascertain whether or not La Belle Chasseuse intended to rejoin her former profession. Brett secured his hearty cooperation by a liberal donation for expenses. The barrister resolved to pay another visit to the Cabaret Noir late that evening, but he waited in the hotel until nearly 10 o'clock in anxious expectation of a telegram from Fairholme. At last the message arrived. Its contents were laconic. "Right first time," it ran. "Invalid lady's name Jack. Somewhat exhausted after long confinement. Edith delighted. Jack visits Under Secretary tonight. We all purpose joining you in Paris tomorrow. Do you approve?" Brett promptly wired "yes," and then set out for Montmartre, dressing himself in the height of fashion so far as his wardrobe would permit, and donning a fierce moustache and wig which completely altered his appearance. He looked like a successful impresario or popular Italian tenor. End of chapter 11, part 2.